think of the word comic in modern times, it's hard not to think of either Marvel or DC. After all, both are at the height of their popularities at the moment, due in part to the cinematic universes both are establishing and building, with titles such as Iron Man, Captain America, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, Justice League, The Flash, Green Arrow. You'd be forgiven for your mind immediately going to that when you think of the word comic. However, today I'm not looking at either Marvel or DC, I'm looking at a comic that's been around for nearly 80 years and is older than Marvel. It's the anarchic home for Rodger The Dodger, the Bash Street Kids, Minnie the Minx, Ivy the Terrible and Dennis The Menace. I'm looking at the iconic Beano Comic. Oh, sorry, a little history first.
I find it difficult to imagine anyone in the UK who hasn't at some point read a Beano comic as a child, or at the very least knows of the comic. Unlike Marvel and DC, where there's a constant narrative and continuity to the comics, where devotion and dedication to a series is all but demanded to follow and understand the story, the Beano focuses on short panel strips full of silly and righteous humour. There's no overarching story, no continuity, the comic regularly plays fast and loose with the rules. I'd argue that the only rule the Beano has is to make its readers laugh, which it's done successfully for the past 8 decades. The Beano was first published on July 30th, 1938 and came with a whoopee mask to entice new readers. Only one of these masks is still known to exist. The bright colourful cover was to draw the attention too, as the inner pages were all black and white. Big Ego the Ostrich took centre stage with the front cover, and Lord Snooty is on page 3, a character and comic strip who still endures to this day. We'll come back to him later. The comic was wildly different than its modern iteration. Sections of the comic are given over to illustrated adventure serials such as Morgan the Mighty and Crackerjack. It's handy to remember that at the time of publication, Disney Studios had only been operating for 15 years, along with Warner Brothers establishing the cartoon industry within the cinemas and introducing scores of children to the idea of comic shorts. Similarly, adventure serials such as Tarzan and Zorro found all new popularity with the advent of talking pictures in the 1920s. The Beano aped on the popularity of these with their own adventure serials too. As time passed and the comic evolved to be more comedy focused, these adventure serials would be mostly dropped. However, a few later inclusions still remain, such as General Jimbo and his robotic army and Billy the Cat, the closest the Beano comes to having an actual superhero.
The Beano would carry on introducing new characters and the serial storytelling up until the advent of the Second World War.
The war affected the comic massively. Within the first month of war, due to paper rationing, the comic was cut from 28 pages to 24 and free gifts to the readers dried up too. As the war progressed, pagination reduced the Beano to 22 pages, 20, and by 1943, the Beano was a paltry 12 pages. Publications too had dropped from a weekly basis to every other week. This of course had an impact on which strips would make it into each issue. However, the comic endured through these tough times, and it cannot be understated how much of a comfort and a distraction to the frightening and horrifying times that children across Britain were facing. The Beano openly ridiculed Adolf Hitler, Goering and Mussolini. The Nazi regime is almost always portrayed as being utterly incompetent and its members being buffoons. I find it incredible to think how the Beano knew how influential it could be as a propaganda tool to educate children on the political and social landscape of the time. It also speaks of the bravery of the illustrators and writers to create such strips. Had the war turned out differently, it could have been very dangerous for them. Through these panels, children learnt the importance of blacking out all lights at night, air raid sirens, recycling everything, and who the real bad guys in the world were. When the war ended, the approach in the 1950s saw the Beano heading into its golden age, an era where a plethora of characters, which still feature in the comic, saw their first introductions. The 1950s really shaped the comic into the form we recognise it today. On the 17th of March, 1951, the Beano's most famous character joined the comic in a half-page strip, the spiky-haired, striped-jumpered, mischief maker, Dennis The Menace. In a staggering coincidence, a comic in the US, also called Dennis The Menace, launched on the exact same day. Rodger The Dodger joined in 1952, followed quickly by Minnie the Minx in 1953, and the Bash Street Kids in 1954. This gang of naughty kids provided the framework for the comic, getting themselves into trouble and angering adults of Beano time for the delight of their readers. Characters would regularly get walloped with slippers or caned by teachers, another sign of the times, and certain strips would have characters destroying slippers and canes in an attempt to stop punishment.
As time went on, more characters were introduced. The 1960s saw Billy Whiz, the world's fastest boy, join the ranks. Dennis also found Gnasher and the strip was renamed Dennis The Menace and Gnasher. The 70s saw Dennis and Nasher supplant Biff or the Bear as the cover star due to the duo's massive popularity with readers.
The editor took note and launched the Dennis The Menace fan club, where members would receive 2 badges and a wallet. These told the world that you were a true Beano fan, and the badges and wallet are highly collectible now. The club had membership in the millions, including celebrities such as Linford Christie and Mark Hamill. That's right, Luke Skywalker became a Phantom Menace. Readers were sending funny photos, jokes, even letters to certain characters with hopes that they'd win the coveted Beano fan t-shirt. The Dennis The Menace fan club would eventually give way to the Beano fan club. Moving into the 80s saw even more characters join the fold, such as Smudge, a kid who loved being dirty, Ivy the Terrible, and one of my all-time favourites, Calamity Janes, the world's unluckiest boy.
The 80s also saw the introduction of the Beano versus Dandy battle, a light-hearted war of sorts between the two comics.
Beano would regularly tease and insult Dandy readers, and likewise the Dandy with the Beano. There's even a strip where Beano characters go to Dandyland, and vice versa. In truth, the battle was internal in the offices of Beano and Dandy. Artists and writers were shared between the two comics, and it became an internal competition of who had the better comic week to week, the prize being a Toby jug. Ultimately, the Beano ended up being the winner, with the Dandy sadly ceasing to be published in 2012, after 75 years. Thankfully, a number of the Dandy's more popular strips would find a new home in the pages of the Beano, such as Banana Man. This brings us to my collection of comics here. It looks quite a sizable amount, but this utterly pales in comparison to other series collectors. Most of my comics are from the 90s, and even in this period, I noticed gradual changes to the comic. The Beano has always continually changed and evolved to suit the reader's interest and humour. As mentioned, new characters would be introduced and less popular characters would be retired, quite charmingly into the Beano Town retirement castle. However, the introduction of new characters isn't the only way that the Beano reinvents itself. The comic has always looked at the world and lampooned and joked about trends, celebrities and culture. Ouch, take that, Kylie. Rodger the Dodger plays with Game Boys and Game Gears, Minnie the Minx has a video game console, and at one point Dennis The Menace had a Tamagotchi. Keeping a keen eye on trends and pop culture and lampooning it isn't the only way that the Beano strive to stay relevant to kids. Characters have had massive overhauls to make them more appealing and relatable to modern audiences. Lord Snooty has lost his top hat, suit and dapper attire for a more contemporary look. Whilst not agreeable to long devoted fans of the comics such as myself, characters get regularly overhauled, and if it keeps the characters funny and entertaining, who am I to judge? Because certain comic strips have been running for decades, it's inevitable that different artists would take on the mantle of continuing them when the previous artist retires or passes on. I remember my first introduction to Dennis The Menace with him being a large, almost teenage-looking boy, drawn by the talented David Sutherland. Then, in the early 90s, Dennis shrank to become a much younger-looking depiction. However, the trademark spiky hair and the red and black jumper remained, and his design has remained largely unchanged since. Dennis's dad, that's his real name in the comics, no, seriously, it is, has had a massive redesign, and one that I find the best. Old Dennis's dad used to wear a red pinstripe suit, balding in appearance with a very trim little moustache.
Now Dennis's dad wears a red and black polo shirt and has hair very similar to Dennis's.
The reasoning behind this? The Dennis I grew up with in the 80s and 90s has himself grown up, and now is father to another Dennis, one that drives him just as wild as he did to his dad. I just love this. Talk about karmic retribution. Walter the Softie, Dennis's main adversary, has changed radically from being a wimpy, weedy sissy boy to a more scheming, devious and villainous depiction. Gone are the days of Dennis simply bullying Walter and his group of softies. Now it's more like a back and forth battle of getting back at each other for being mean or nasty to one another.
Mentioning bullying, in 2009 controversy hit the Beano with a redesign of Dennis and Nasher. This was to coincide with the new Dennis and Nasher cartoon on the BBC, but with political correctness on the agenda, Dennis was redesigned to have no weapons, Nasher to never nash any posties or other people, and the menacing to happen by accident and naivety rather than intentional. Fan reaction was generally negative to this, and the strip was tweaked so Dennis would still use his weapons, but never against people. During the writing of this review, news broke on the 8th of October that Dennis was being redesigned again for a new BBC computer animated TV show. The catapult is once again gone, along with all of his other weapons, replaced with an iPad. Nasher looks like he's had his teeth filed, and Dennis forms a band with new friends. Walter the Softie isn't a softie anymore. Inclusivity is the main focus of the show, and admittedly, despite what I said earlier, I really don't like this. Dennis is a menace, not a rock band member, not a minor pest to his parents and neighbours, he's a menace. I'm thankful I grew up in the era of him causing real trouble, getting grounded and punished for being a bad kid. I never went around smashing windows with a catapult or firing peas at people with a pea shooter, but it was funny to see. Kids knew the consequences of doing this in real life. Every strip, Dennis would get in trouble. Modern day Dennis would be slapped with an Asbo, I know, but a menace with an iPad? What's he gonna do? Send a bad tweet to Desperate Dan? Downvote a Dandy YouTube video? Please. Aforementioned, most of my comics here are from the 1990s, and the earlier comics in my collection have a mixture between black and white and full colour pages.
On October 16th, 1993, the comic went full colour, something that had only been reserved for the summer specials. I personally love the old comic's hand-painted and hand-drawn look, whereas modern issues are digitally drawn and coloured. Alongside the weekly comic, the Beano had summer specials. A staple of going on holiday was picking us up at the airport departure lounge. Some of my issues here have stains from where suntan lotion got on the comic whilst at the beach. Starting in 1983, the Beano Comic Library was small comic books that took a singular character or strip from the weekly comic and dedicated a full story to them. I absolutely love these, and they really allowed the writers to dive into the characters and put them in scenarios and situations that wouldn't be possible within the weekly comic. These were printed in a black and white and colour fashion, very similar to the printing methods of the old Beano annuals. Full colour stories of a similar vein were found in the Beano Superstars comic book series, again allowing for wacky and fun stories for beloved characters, all retaining the trademark humour.
Next year, the Beano celebrates its 80th birthday, a truly landmark achievement for any comic.
The Beano is special. It's undeniably British in its humour and artwork, its themes and its jokes. As much as it lampoons and apes popular culture, the Beano comic itself is popular culture. Even Doctor Who loves the Beano. Its absurd look at British culture and life means that it will always remain fresh. Its legacy and long-standing appeal means that it will continue on for many years to come. My granddad read the Beano, as did my dad before me, and to know that these characters are as much as a part of their growing up as they were mine, it's incredible to think about.
There's so much more I want to talk about with the Beano, but this video is getting long enough as it is already. Check back in a future video where I look at the Beano annuals, the video games, the TV series and the collectibles. Thanks again for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.